If you're looking for trouble, da-na-na-na-na.
I'll break it, burn it, drag it all around, twist it, turn it, you can't tear it down. 'Cause every minute, every hour, you'll be shaken by the strength and mighty power of my love. Crush it, kick it, you can never win. No, baby, you can't lick it. I'll make you give in. Every minute, every hour, you'll be shaken by the strength and mighty power of my love.
Hey, it's Edwin Canestracci here, and I'm back to discuss Elvis yet again. That's right, this is part 2 of my beginner's guide to Elvis, and I'm just going to jump right into it. If you want to hear a preamble, listen to part 1, okay? This is part 2, so I'm assuming you've already listened to part 1. And if you haven't, well, I'm going to leave a link down below. Click on the link just in case YouTube dropped the ball. You can't always trust an algorithm. Elvis once said that. He said you can never trust an algorithm. King can see into the future. You think King of Rock and Roll can't see into the future? Elvis knew all about algorithms. He wasn't down with it. And you know what else he wasn't down with? Well, in 1968, he wasn't down with the movies he was making anymore, or the music he was making. It all started to be a real drag on Elvis. It didn't help that his last couple movies underperformed as well. He wasn't really topping the charts anymore, and it was not Elvis's best work, and Elvis knew it, and he was feeling beaten down, and he needed to be rejuvenated. He was only in his early 30s because of the Beatles and the British invasion and Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison. Elvis already, to a lot of younger people, seemed like an artifact, from the past. And he was only in his early 30s, but he needed to show a lot of people. He needed to show a lot of people that he wasn't some relic from the past, that he was still a young and vibrant, passionate, awesome performer. And so, luckily, what happened is the comeback special. Yes, the comeback special. The famous 1968 comeback special, which wasn't actually called a comeback special. No one actually calls a comeback when it's happening. It was just the Elvis special. And he had never done a special before. He had made TV appearances before on Ed Sullivan and what have you, but he never had his own special before. So they advertised it. That was a big thing. It was Elvis's first special. Originally, the Colonel, his manager, Colonel Parker, and NBC, they wanted it to be, because it was coming out in December 3rd was when it was premiering, they wanted it to be a Christmas special, like an hour-long Elvis Christmas special. Elvis himself, though, knew that that's the last thing he needed, was to seem like some corny old guy, again, only in his early 30s, but a corny old guy doing a Christmas special. Shit was going down. Martin Luther King had just been shot, and it's 1968. Think of the albums that were out in that time period. Elvis knew that he can't be just a guy singing some Christmas songs for an hour. He buddied up with the producer and the director. So he got some champions. He got some champions and some people to back him on this vision that he had, that he wanted to be reintroduced to the younger generation with this special. He wanted to take as an opportunity to wrestle some power back from the Colonel and actually be a relevant artist again. So he took this opportunity. The producer had his back, director had his back, and they pushed it in the direction that Elvis wanted it to go into. Especially, you gotta watch it. Of course, it's on Blu-ray and DVD. You could watch it on YouTube if you want to just watch a straight-up version of it. And it's amazing. It's one of the great rock and roll specials of all time. And just look at Elvis. Elvis never looked and sounded better than he did, in my opinion, in 1968. This is peak Elvis. Physically, it's peak Elvis. I think musically and as a live performer, his peak is the next year, 1969. I think 1969 is his overall peak. And he looked damn good in 69 as well. But 68, him in that black leather, man, it's iconic. He never looked more awesome. That's a guy that is competing with Jim Morrison. I'm sure he turned a lot of young girls' heads. So just look at him. And he sounded great too. Elvis never, as much as I love his singing and his performing, in the 50s. This is now a seasoned professional and also a man that has the weight of pain, the weight of losing his mother, who meant so much to him. And he was going through a rocky marriage and, he'd just been through a lot of shit. This was now a man in his 30s, but with the passion and the fury of young Elvis. So it was like the best of young Elvis with 30-something Elvis combined. And that's why this is such an amazing performance. It was shot in NBC Studios in Burbank. It's not all actually live, which you can kind of tell if you're watching. There's essentially 2 live performances. I would say they're the 2 most iconic parts of the special. The one where Elvis is standing in the leather with a crowd around him. That was recorded live with this audience that they brought in Burbank. I feel like that section of the show was really the prototype for what his Vegas show would then be subsequently. So this was kind of him singing the hits, rock and roll stuff, mixed in with some orchestrated ballads. I feel like that's the prototype for his Vegas shows. But this is still a more intimate, raw version of that. Even more iconic is the sit-down performance where they brought back Scotty. Yeah, Scotty Moore, DJ Fontana, and 2 guys from his entourage. They're all there. They're playing guitar. And Elvis is there sitting, still wearing the black leather, playing this guitar. It's a very innovative performance because you can see how like this really was what MTV Unplugged was modeling itself after. Like if you look at this performance and how loose it is and how he jokes with the crowd, says a little something about the song, the vibe is very prototypical MTV Unplugged. So a very innovative performance, and it's amazing. Oh my God. When he does Lawdy Miss Claudie going into Baby What You Want Me to Do, oh man. And he starts stomping, and man, it's one of the great all-time performances. Elvis just looked like such a bad mofo, and he sounded great, and it's amazing. And then there's musical numbers. Now, the bookending musical numbers are amazing. What opens the show is one of my favorite Elvis songs of all time, Trouble from King Creole. Opens with that, but then it goes into Jerry Reed's Guitar Man, which he had covered for the Clam Bake soundtrack. As much as I like that version, and as much as I like the original Jerry Reed version, this is easily the best version of Guitar Man. It's amazing. God, that energy, the rawness, the chugga-chugga on the guitar, and Elvis is singing. Easily best version of Guitar Man. It's awesome. And the way it ends, oh God, the comeback special, the way it ends with him now wearing the white suit, and he's really getting his kind of gospel on, and he sings If I Can Dream. Now, this was a new song that was written specifically for Elvis. Originally, the Colonel and NBC wanted him to end with a Christmas song. Again, Elvis pushed back on that, and he was very upset about Martin Luther King being shot just 2 months prior, and he wanted to do a speech at first about it, but the Colonel didn't like that idea. Elvis shouldn't be getting political and making a speech, and I think ultimately the compromise they made was the right compromise, because this is what Elvis does best, sings. So the compromise was you could sing a song about it. Instead of making a speech, you'll sing a song. Elvis approached 2 songwriters and told them, what he wanted. He wanted to write a song that expressed how he felt about Martin Luther King and about his assassination. In one night, apparently, they wrote this amazing song for Elvis. And when Elvis heard the demo, he was very moved by hearing just the demo of the song. He said, "I'm never going to sing a song I don't believe in ever again." You could tell when you hear him singing this song, and that was pre-recorded. The pre-recorded tracks were done on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood at Western Recordings, very famous recording studio. But that performance, man, and that's just his singing. That's like some of Elvis's most powerful singing. I get chills just thinking about it. It's one of his all-time best vocal performances. And God, who could watch that and not feel something? It's amazing. The only thing I would say about the comeback special is some of the middle musical numbers. That's like the most dated stuff, when it feels a little like something from a variety show, like Laughing, when they're dancing around. And even though he gets in some good gospel there and he sings Guitar Man a few times, that's like the motif, that's the theme that keeps appearing again and again during the comeback special. But that small criticism aside, everything else is amazing about the 68 comeback special. It was released then in 1968 as a live album, which they simply called Elvis, just like the special was simply called Elvis. It had all the highlights, and 2 singles came out of it. If I Can Dream was a single. In Memories was a very nice, kind of mellow, easy listening ballad, very beautifully sung by Elvis. There's a expanded version, which is called Memories, the 68 comeback special. And I recommend getting that. That's a 2-disc, and it has some stuff that they didn't end up using for the comeback special, and it's all remastered, and it sounds great. I will say this, I recommend watching it. It was designed to be watched, not listened to as much, so I do think that's the best way to experience it. But if you watch it and, hey, you love it and you want to hear it, definitely check out Memories 68 Comeback Special. So Elvis is all rejuvenated. A lot of people love the comeback special. If I Can Dream and Memories both were his highest charted singles since 1965. The special was like the top rated special on TV that year. And everyone was excited about Elvis. He kicked ass and, he totally nailed it and they were all excited. And Elvis was rejuvenated. He wanted to get right into a studio and record a proper album. Unless we count some gospel albums, he did not record a really proper, good album since Elvis Is Back, since 1960. So it's been like 8 years since he went into a studio and kicked ass. He was a man on a mission. He was going back to his roots. He was going back to Memphis. That's where it all started. He was going back to what was probably the hottest studio in Memphis at that time. And he goes there right in the beginning, January 1969, right on the heels of the comeback special. And he goes to American Sound Studios and he's utilizing a new band. He's utilizing the house band at the studio, the Memphis Boys. It's funny because he was originally part of the Blue Moon Boys. Well, now he's playing with the Memphis Boys. And this is a great legendary group of session musicians. They also played on another legendary late 60s comeback album that was recorded there, Dusty Springfield's Dusty in Memphis. Love that album. Great musicians to be working with. Exactly the right move, exactly what he should have been doing. And it resulted in this masterpiece. From Elvis in Memphis. From Elvis in Memphis. Check that out. There we go. Even played the comeback special soundtrack. There we go. From Elvis in Memphis, which is my favorite Elvis album. There you go. From Elvis in Memphis is my very favorite Elvis album, and it's one of my favorite albums, period. I think it's one of the greatest country, soul, rock and roll records ever recorded. And so he knocked this out with the boys, plus a lot of other classic songs that we'll find out later came out as singles, and also another whole album's worth of material. He was inspired with these, very talented musicians, and this is the thing too, and I got into this in the last video, but, Elvis was never simply just a white man doing black music. And he always had a very authentic connection to that music. But country was also a very big influence in his music. And this album, kind of like the Sun Sessions, but in a kind of, I would say, more complex, nuanced, and matured way, and with obviously superior recording techniques, this album does the same thing where it's blending in the roots. It's updated for like 1969, but it's country, it's blues, it's soul, it's gospel, and a little bit of pop, all rolled together. And sometimes all in like the same song. Like there are times where, I'm listening to it and I'm like, I can't really say if this is country or soul. It's kind of like both. It's like country and soul music. The Rolling Stones were a little like that on Exile on Main Street. And this is before that. And I'm just going to go through the songs real fast. Wearing that loved on look, shoop, shoop. Oh, God, love it. Just a deep, kind of funky soul song. Love that song. Sexy. Only the Strong Survive. Another kind of poppy soul song. Very moving. I love when Elvis talking about what his mama said. And it's great. I'll hold you in my heart until I can hold you in my arms. An amazing song. Beautiful song. I would say country with a little touch of soul. Long Black Limousine, actually a country song. But when Elvis tackles it, it suddenly becomes a country soul gospel masterpiece. A masterpiece, this song. This is, again, I said this in the other video. When Elvis did a song, that's it. He ruined the song for anyone else, and I heard that original version. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't what Elvis did with it. Elvis, just like a great actor, he just puts so much emotion and feeling. Every line is something he's experiencing. And that song and the lyrics, it's heartbreaking. A heartbreaking, beautiful song. Love Long Black Limousine. That's one of my favorite songs on the album. Keeps right on a hurtin'. That's just straight up honky-tonk kind of country ballad. Love it. I'm moving on. Now, moving on, I would say it's a soul number with a little tinge of country and gospel mixed in. Oh, man, I love I'm Moving On. It just kind of gets me moving. And then we have my very favorite Elvis song. That's right, the first song on side 2, Power of My Love. That song you heard at the beginning of this video. Power of My Love. It's my favorite Elvis song. It's kind of similar to Trouble. It's like a slow, sexy, down and dirty, really emotionally powerful, sexy soul song. There you go. Just a soul song, a bluesy soul song. I love Power of My Love. man. This is the Elvis that's now confident after the 68 comeback special. He's owning it. He's totally owning it. Gentle on My Mind, beautiful country ballad, but again, with a little touch of soul. There's a little undercurrent of funky soul to it, even though I would call it a country ballad. After Loving You, probably my second favorite song on the album. I love this song. Reminds me a little of the Beatles' Oh Darling, which sounds kind of like an Elvis song, so that makes sense. But After Loving You, just a great rock and roll ballad. That's what I'd call a rock and roll ballad with great lyrics. And oh man, I really connect with it. I love that song and its lyrics. True Love Travels on a Gravel Road, amazing song. Kind of country, loungy soul song. All right, it's some of these songs just sound like Elvis songs. Like this, just Elvis music. Any day now, probably the poppiest song here. It's a Burt Bacharach number. But again, this is another example. And no disrespect to Tom Jones, but listen to that Tom Jones version. Then listen to Elvis's version. God, Elvis sings it with so much more feeling and vulnerability, and it's amazing, especially that breakdown where he gets all gentle and emotional. It's amazing. He's the king. And then finally, the most famous song on the album, which was a huge comeback single for him, even bigger than the last two from the comeback special, In the Ghetto. In the Ghetto was a huge hit, kind of like the first album where there was Blue Suede Shoes. This uncharacteristically had a single on the album, because normally they didn't do that. Normally RCA didn't like the singles being on the album. In the Ghetto, and In the Ghetto's amazing, and it's kind of an extension from If I Can Dream. You know, he's singing about urban blight, and God, I wish this wasn't the case, but it's still very poignant and relevant to this day. In the Ghetto could still be written now, but it's a beautiful song, a sadly beautiful song, and a classic, and again, a song that I would say is kind of soul meets country with some gospel, a little bit of pop. That's Elvis. He mixes all these genres together. He's perhaps the most American artist that's ever come out of America, because he's hitting all the roots of American music. And it's amazing. This is a perfect album. It's a masterpiece. This era, like I said, is my favorite period for Elvis. If you're into like stuff like Dusty in Memphis, or even I would say rootsier Rolling Stones like Beggar's Banquet, if you like that album, I think you would like this album. Also, if you like a lot late 60s, early 70s country, especially like outlaw country, if you love Willie Nelson, if you love Waylon Jennings, if you love early Dolly Parton, if you love that kind of stuff, then I think this is definitely the first Elvis album you should go to. I think you'd love the early stuff too, if you like that stuff. You'd like the first two RCA albums and the Sun Sessions, but this I think you'd like the most. So this album came out, it was a critical and commercial success. In the Ghetto was a big hit. And then there was another really big song that came out of these sessions that they held off as just a single, and that was Suspicious Minds. Suspicious Minds, released in 1969, a few months after In the Ghetto. And it was a huge hit. It was one of his biggest hits of all time. It was a #1 hit. It became a signature song. Suspicious Minds shows Elvis is competitive. He's competitive with the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan. And this was a new modern classic song. It's a classic Elvis song. Another song, like a lot of the songs from the In Memphis sessions, it's another song that really mixes country, blues, soul, it's all mixed together. Like you could be a soul artist and cover this song, or you could be a country artist like Waylon Jennings covered it. It hits it all. It's the ultimate Elvis song. Objectively, this is his greatest song, and it's one of my favorites, although my favorite version is a live version that we're going to be talking about now. Because then, after he knocked out from Elvis in Memphis, Elvis was hot to perform. He wanted to perform again. So the Colonel arranged that with the International Hotel in Las Vegas, a month-long engagement. So during a whole month, Elvis was going to play at the International Hotel, getting back to his roots. Like not like in a NBC Studios, but in a real proper live venue setting. And Elvis was going to perform for the people again. And they recorded an amazing live album. In fact, it's my favorite Elvis live album. So there you go, 1969, to me, peak Elvis. But this gets a little complicated, so let me walk you through this. When it was first released, it was released as a double album, and it was called From Memphis to Vegas / From Vegas to Memphis. All right, you got that? From Memphis to Vegas, from Vegas to Memphis. And it was 2 albums. First album was the live album, In Person at the International Hotel, Las Vegas, Nevada. That's the full title. It's a mouthful, I know. I just call it In Person at the International Hotel, which is still a little bit of a mouthful, but not as much. And then the second album was a studio album called Back in Memphis, which was essentially a bunch of songs that they didn't end up using on From Elvis in Memphis. So it was a bunch of songs from those sessions that they didn't end up using and didn't use as singles. So they released this initially together. All subsequent releases, though, would separate the two. All right? I think it was only in, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was only in 1969 that was released this way. Afterwards, these were two separate albums. I'm going to tackle Back in Memphis first. Back in Memphis, you can hear why most of these songs didn't make the cut. So yeah, it's not as awesome as From Elvis in Memphis, but still, it has that residue. I mean, it still has that vibe. It's from those sessions. So if you love that album, you'll at very least like this album. And I like it a lot. I really like Inherit the Wind and Stranger in My Own Hometown's a great song. My favorite song is a deep track, one of my favorite Elvis songs called From a Jack to a King. Amazing song, amazing rock and roll song with pageantry and romance and swagger, all the things I love in an Elvis song. That should have become another Elvis signature song, but a lot of people don't know that song. From Jack to a King, that almost alone makes this album worth it. But like I recommended a lot in the last episode, get the Legacy Edition. Buy the Legacy Edition of From Elvis in Memphis, because that's where Back in Memphis can now be found. The Legacy Edition from Elvis in Memphis includes Back in Memphis. And, they do belong together. They're both, studio albums from the same session. So it makes more sense to have them together than the way they originally had it with the live album. So the Legacy Edition from Elvis in Memphis, which to me is the greatest Elvis purchase you could ever make, has both From Elvis in Memphis and Back in Memphis, plus all the singles and B-sides. That means Suspicious Minds and Kentucky Rain, and all the B-sides from the singles. Put them all together, one awesome package, and then you know what I like to do? I separate the albums. I got the two studio albums as two separate albums, and then I have a whole new album of just the singles and the B-sides from this period. His best period, in my opinion. So I'd highly recommend the Legacy Edition of From Elvis in Memphis. And likewise, there is a Legacy Edition of In Person at the International Hotel, Las Vegas, Nevada, in case you didn't know which Las Vegas it was. And I'll talk a little bit about what's in that Legacy Edition after I just talk about this album. The greatest live Elvis album ever. Opens with Blue Suede Shoes, and he's a man on a mission. He wants to prove something. He wants to show that he can compete with all those younger bands. Again, he's only in his early 30s, but that's how the world moved back then. It was moving so fast that a guy in his early 30s could feel old. But he doesn't sound old here by any means. He's kicking ass. Johnny B. Good, great version of Johnny B. Good. My very favorite version of the song, actually. There you go. Almost always, when Elvis sings a song, it becomes my favorite version of the song. I think these live versions are stronger than the original ones from the 50s. I just think the band's great, the production's great, and Elvis just sounds so great. There's so much power to his singing, and I just love it. Great version of Willie Dixon's My Babe. I love that. He does Mystery Train going to Tiger Man. Love it, awesome. He does a nice ballad, a Bee Gees ballad, Words, not bad. And then he hits the two big singles at that time period, In the Ghetto and Suspicious Minds. And Suspicious Minds, this live version that's on this live album, is my favorite version of Suspicious Minds. And to me, this is the definitive version. This is the definitive version. Just like how Midnight Rambler, that live version that's on Get Your Gagas Out, I think is the definitive version of that song. This is the definitive version of Suspicious Minds. The band kicks up the tempo. They make it more epic. Elvis' singing's even more powerful. It's a definitive, defining, iconic Elvis moment. When I think of Elvis, I usually think of him singing Suspicious Minds and going into Can't Help Falling in Love, which is how he ended all his shows. And it's a beautiful song. It's a perfect coda after the rock and roll, country, soul, gospel explosion that is Suspicious Minds. One of the great live albums of all time. I wish I had it on vinyl. I don't, but that's definitely, it's on my to-get list. The Legacy Edition includes another live album that was also recorded in 69 during this month engagement at the International Hotel, but this album came out originally in 1970, and it was called On Stage. And On Stage is, this shouldn't surprise you, it's my second favorite live Elvis album, and it's amazing. This album, what made it a little different from the other album is, for the most part, it focused on songs that he wasn't normally associated with. So it's less rock and roll, although there's some rock and roll, and less of the songs that people thought of as Elvis songs. Although a couple of them, people would start thinking of them as Elvis songs. Like CC Rider, that's something that he famously opened the Aloha from Hawaii special, was also the opener for that. So CC Rider's great, and Elvis really makes it his own. And Release Me's great. Runaway, he does a version of Del Shannon's Runaway. That's the only one I wouldn't say I think is better than the original, but it's just as good. It's equal in its own way. Love that. Polk Salad Annie. This is an Elvis live classic. Again, I listened to that original. It wasn't bad. A funky, good country, southern rock kind of song. But Elvis, man, he makes the song epic. He takes it to a whole other level. Polk Salad Annie. Love it. Love it. Amazing. Walk a Mile in My Shoes. Amazing. Let It Be Me. Beautiful. I love how he sings this song. It's amazing. This whole album's amazing. And the best way to listen to it is get that Legacy edition, and then you got those 2 live albums plus some bonus tracks. They got some other great live performances that weren't on the original versions. And then also in 1970, hey, Elvis was still cooking. He wasn't ready to stop. Elvis was still on fire. So he did another engagement at the International Hotel, and they turned that into another album and a documentary film. That's the way it is. Great film that really shows you Elvis at this time. To me, this is just a little after the peak. I think 1969 is the peak, and that was documented on the albums I just talked about. So this is just like a little after that peak, but I still consider it comeback era. That might be in debate with some Elvis fans. What's comeback era? To me, comeback era is 68 to 71. That's it. Maybe you can count 72. I'll talk about that when we wrap up. I mean, the peak 69, but 70, you got Stage, and you got That's the Way It Is, and Elvis still looks good. He's still singing amazing. His show is getting a little more Vegas-y here. You even see it in the documentary. It's not quite the raw and primal rock and roll show that he was doing just a few months prior. It's becoming a little bit of a Vegas thing. But he still sounds great. Still sounds like he's singing the songs he wants to sing, even if he's moving in a kind of poppier and more romantic direction. And I think Elvis generally loves singing these kind of songs. I Just Can't Help Believing's beautiful. Patch It Up that's probably the most rockin' song on the album. Great rock and roll song with kind of a soul groove to it. I love that. And I think one of his greatest covers he ever did, You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling. Oh my God, when Elvis sings this song, who would think that someone could out-righteous the Righteous Brothers? But Elvis does. Just watch this performance on YouTube. It's amazing, which is featured in the documentary and on this companion live album. You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling. Elvis turns this song, which was a beautiful and powerful song to begin with, and he just makes it technicolor. He makes it like high drama. And his performance, the way he moves, the way he hits the notes, and it's one of the most dramatic, powerful performances ever. Ever. Period. It's amazing. I love his version of You Lost That Loving Feeling. My favorite version of the song. Stranger in the Crowd, great country song. Again, not quite on the level as in person at the International Hotel, but it's great to watch this documentary. You get to see Elvis behind the scenes, warming up. Like the first half was him warming up with the band and doing the rehearsal sessions, some of which led to some of the studio tracks on the album, which I'll talk about in a sec. And then the other half shows him playing this like dinner show. Like, you see celebrities come in, Cary Grant, Sammy Davis Jr., they're eating dinner, and then Elvis performs for them. God, what a great night out that would be. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. This is still top shelf Elvis in my opinion, all right? And I still consider this comeback era. Get those other albums first, but if you like them all, this is the next stop to hit on the comeback train. And the album, likewise, the album was a mixture of studio tracks that came out of those rehearsals mixed with the live performances, some of which you saw in the movie. And of course, like all these other albums I'm talking about, there was a Legacy edition, and it kept the original album, which was a mixture of the rehearsals and the live tracks, with the full uncut concert with all just the live tracks, and you get some extra songs that way. That's the best way to get this album in my opinion, and that's the version I got. If you like the other albums and you like early 70s country and pop music and soul music and Motown stuff, if you like that, then definitely get That's the Way It Is, and definitely watch the documentary as well. And then he's got Elvis Country, in parentheses, I'm 10,000 years old. Now, this is an album not a lot of people know about, and it's really good. It's, again, not quite as good as the material from the last 3 years, in my opinion, but I still think it's good enough that I consider comeback era. Definitely the last stages of the comeback era. But it's a solid conceptual album, and it's a country album, but leave it to Elvis to have a country album that still has a lot of soul and gospel influence in it. Like, Elvis just can't help himself. Like, this is just the music that's very authentic to him, and he just can't help mixing it. It leans into the country element a little more than most Elvis albums, mainly because they have this connecting song, I'm 10,000 Years Old, which has some hillbilly-ish kind of jamboree harmonica on it that kind of comes in and out, like a linking track. But short of that, the songs, the proper songs on the album, are more or less the same kind of mixture of songs you had on from Elvis in Memphis, where there's some country, some gospel, some rock and roll. He does Jerry Lee Lewis's Whole Lot Shaking going on. Great version of that. And it's a great album. I really love it. And it's a nice in the morning kind of album to listen to. Again, if you love 70s country, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Dolly Parton, well, definitely check out Elvis Country, I'm 10,000 Years Old. And to me, that's pretty much it. We do have 2 great singles in 1972. Birding Love, classic song. Love that song. And a few months after that, sadly, after he split up with Priscilla, he released The Separate Ways and Always on My Mind single. Always on My Mind was actually the B-side, which is interesting because I think nowadays, like, that's the song that's more well-known. Always on My Mind, I can't listen to that song without crying. In right away, like, first verse. As soon as Elvis starts singing that first verse, oh my God, I get the feels. I get the feels big time. Always on My Mind. Something about that song. It's one of the most beautiful songs. And to me, like, if we're counting singles, I'll say that Always on My Mind is the end of the comeback era. All right? If we're talking albums, I'll say Elvis Country. If we're talking live albums, that's the way it is. And if we're talking singles, it's Separate Ways, Always on My Mind. After that, he's definitely past comeback era. And you even see in the Aloha from Hawaii special, they starting to gain weight, and it's starting to become that kind of Vegas Elvis that people think of when they think of, like, Vegas Elvis. Always on My Mind's kind of like the last amber in the fire of the comeback years. And then sadly, unfortunately, Elvis declined. He gained weight. He was always a beautiful singer, but, there's so much he could take, a lot of physical abuse and drugs, and the Colonel always pushing him to perform. And it's just very sad. It's very sad because he was one of the greatest performers an artist of the 20th century. But his music lives with us, and that's what's important. Not a lot of artists have several periods, and like I said, Elvis has these 3 great periods in my opinion. There's the Sun Sessions and his early RCA recordings. There's that little bit of a kind of proto comeback in the early 60s with Elvis Is Back and that period with some great singles. And then we have my favorite period, which I discussed in this video, the comeback years, which is 68 to 71, maybe 72. It's amazing stuff. He's definitely one of my favorite artists, and I'd love to get more people into Elvis, because a lot of people know his songs, and I think they know his hits, but I don't think they dive into the album. So hopefully these 2 videos helped you with that. And I'm going to recommend one other thing about Elvis. He always released gospel music. Gospel music was very important to Elvis. So he was always releasing some gospel albums. He released an EP in the 50s, 2 albums in the 60s, another 3rd gospel album in the 70s. A lot of the highlights from those albums was compiled in a compilation called Ultimate Gospel. And I recommend that. I think that's a good way to kind of dive into his gospel stuff, because I myself, I'll say it, I'm not a religious man. I'm not even a huge fan of gospel music, even though I love a lot of R&B and soul and rock music that's influenced by gospel music. Straight gospel is usually not really for me. But this album, I gave it a shot. It's like, you know what? Elvis really loved gospel. It's the music he loved singing most. I love him as a singer. So I'm going to give it a shot. So I got this compilation, and I got to say, yeah, I don't listen to it all the time. You got to be in a certain mood for it. But if you're in a certain mood, a certain Sunday morning, it's a great album. And this is like gospel music done by Elvis. So it's got a little devil in it. He can't help himself. It's got a little swagger to it. It's like gospel music that I could see like the Righteous Gemstones getting down to. So if that sounds appealing to you, definitely check out Ultimate Gospel. And 2 last recommendations. A movie, because right now there's a new Elvis movie out, but a lot of people don't know that there was a movie back in 1979. It was a television movie. Initially it was a television movie directed by John Carpenter. That's right. The same John Carpenter who did all those classic horror films like Halloween and The Fog and The Thing and Big Trouble in Little China. Yeah, that John Carpenter. And Kurt Russell, who played Elvis. In fact, it was the first time that John Carpenter and Kurt Russell did something together. This was the beginning of a very important cinematic union. I love John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. I love those movies they did together. So just for that reason alone, I always took an interest in this film, and it's one of the first films I remember seeing in the early 80s as a wee child. And it's good. It's gritty. Dark, gritty. It feels like something that was made in the late 70s. It's really dark and gritty. I really like it, and I think Kurt Russell did a really good job playing Elvis. And it was released theatrically in Canada, I believe. Subsequently on DVD and Blu-ray, they put it together like a movie. So I really like it. So if you're interested in seeing an Elvis movie directed by John Carpenter starring Kurt Russell, and why wouldn't you be? Yeah, check out Elvis. And finally, I want to recommend a fellow YouTuber who was always a big inspiration for me. He's actually was number one reason I started making videos. Ralph Viera. Ralph Viera and his Almost Human page. It's a big page. He's got lots of subscribers, many more than me. But he's always been a big influence. And he's also, I know, a big Elvis fan. He does these album battles where they're like, people pay him to have certain albums battle each other. He did one video where he put From Elvis in Memphis, my favorite Elvis album, up against Elvis Is Back, my third favorite Elvis album. And, as he does it, he essentially reviews the album. So it's a fun framework, but to me, what I like most about it is just hearing Ralph talk about the albums. He's great at music reviews, and he has a real passion for Elvis, and he knows his Elvis just like I do. He knows his Elvis, and so I'm going to leave a link down below to that video as well. So if you're curious to hear one of my main influences talk about Elvis, well, click on that link. And that's it. I'm wrapping up now. I have nothing left to say about Elvis for at least the time being. Ooh, look at the sun. Getting really bright. Let me put my shades on. So yeah, I'm Edwin Canestracci. Elvis has left the building. Well, Edwin's about to leave the building. And I'm going to have a drink. I'm going to listen to some Elvis. Good times. Rock and roll. And like I always say, if you like this video and you want to watch some more of my videos, please subscribe. I'm giving you free content here. So do me a favor and subscribe, and I'll keep it interesting. I review rock, R&B, metal, hip-hop, jazz, country. I do a lot of different kinds of music. I'm going to even do some movies. I might actually hit my favorite John Carpenter movie for Halloween. I'm planning on reviewing that. So if you want to hear me talk about music and movies, subscribe, and YouTube will tell you the next time I do a cool video. That's how that works. It's like magic. Algorithms. I don't know if that's an algorithm. Elvis probably knew, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm done. I'm out. Edwin's leaving the building, taking care of business. Rock and roll.